The echo of laughter reverberated off the mirrored walls of the Elite Combat Academy, in the heart of Buckhead, Atlanta. Amid the state-of-the-art equipment and the leathery smell of imported punching bags, Zara adjusted her purple belt for the third time. His fingers trembled imperceptibly. Every step on the Japanese mat sounded like an announcement. The other wrestlers, all white, all from top Georgia universities, paused their warm-ups. It wasn't open hostility. It was something worse. Condescending curiosity. "First time here?" asked a female voice, full of false kindness. Zara didn't answer. She knew that any word would be measured, weighed, judged. Coach Bradley crossed his arms, regarding her with the same look she reserved for faulty equipment. At 50, a former state champion, he ran that gym like a private fiefdom. His students paid $300 a month for the privilege of training there. Zara had saved for 8 months to be on that mat. "Let's see if you can handle the pace," he murmured, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "This isn't like other places." The low chuckles began as she performed her first kata. Precise, fluid movements, the result of 15 years of dedication. But to them, it was, "Did she learn that from watching movies?" Someone whispered. Coach Bradley smiled. He didn't intervene. When Zara finished the sequence, the silence was broken only by the sound of ventilation. She maintained her posture, breathing controlled, waiting for the technical feedback every fighter deserves. Instead came the sentence that would change everything. "Gentleness doesn't win a fight," he said, as others laughed. But she knew it wasn't about strength. Zara knew that choreography. First, the look of recognition, oh, a black person. Then the quick scan, hair, clothes, posture. Finally, the silent categorization that would define every future interaction. At Elite Combat Academy, this ritual was performed with the precision of an ancient ceremony. Madison, the daughter of a federal judge, discreetly adjusted her position on the mat. It wasn't to exclude Zara, it was to maintain the group's natural harmony. Kevin, heir to a Midtown law dynasty, offered that smile white people reserve to demonstrate they don't see color. The problem wasn't open hatred, it was the performative tolerance. In that space, there were two types of belonging, NATO and conquered. The children of Atlanta's elite were born to belong. Zara would have to prove, daily, that she deserved to be there. It wasn't enough to be good. She had to be impeccable. One technical error would be lack of experience. 2 errors, maybe it's not for you. 3 errors, and the silence itself would become deafening. "I love the diversity you bring," commented Harrison, the mother of one of the students, during an academy event. Her voice carried that poisonous sweetness of Southern women who grew up served by black maids. Diversity. As if Zara were a special ingredient in a white recipe. Zara's every move carried the weight of all the black women who would never step foot on that mat. If she failed, it wouldn't be Zara who failed. It would be black women who can't. If she shone, it would be the exception that proves the rule. She felt the responsibility on her shoulders to be perfect for an entire race. The cruelest part wasn't the shouted racism, it was the whispered one. The jokes that stopped when she approached, the happy hour invitations that never reached her phone, the superficial friendships that ended in the gym parking lot. They tolerated her there, but never in their lives. When Zara looked around, she saw a reflection of an America that still functioned as a private club. Academia was a microcosm of boardrooms, country clubs, and elite universities, spaces where diversity was policy, but intimacy remained segregated. It was during a conversation about the Academy's scholarship program that Zara understood. They assumed she was there out of charity. No one asked about his engineering degree from Georgia Tech, or the championships he had won since he was 12. In their minds, people like her only got there through white benevolence. The laughter was collective, but the target was clear. In that gym, bodies like hers and those of black color were still an exception, disguised as inclusion. In the silence of the locker room, Zara heard her grandmother's voice. "You have to be twice as good to get half of what they have." These words had been planted in her soul at age 7, when she came home crying because her teacher had ignored her raised hand throughout class. Now, at 28, they reverberated like a painful mantra. Every move needed to be calculated. If she was too aggressive, she would be temperamental. If she was too gentle, she would be weak. If she demonstrated technical knowledge, she would be conceited. If she asked questions, she would be unprepared. There was no comfort zone for women like her. just a tightrope over the abyss of other people's judgment. Memory, East Atlanta Elementary School. Zara, the only black girl in her advanced math class. The awkward silence when she got problems right that the others got wrong. The teacher who always forgot to include her in the honors class photos. At 10, she learned that shining could also be a form of loneliness. Each achievement carried the unfulfilled hopes of previous generations. His mother, who dropped out of college to work in two-family homes. His grandfather, who had the intelligence to be an engineer but died as a janitor. To fail wasn't just to disappoint herself, it was to betray a lineage of sacrifice. Zara had built an impenetrable personality, always prepared, never vulnerable, perpetually competent. At work meetings at Coca-Cola, she arrived with 3 backup plans. In casual encounters, she memorized conversation topics. At the gym, she studied every technique to exhaustion. Perfection had become his personal prison. Every step on the mat was measured twice, not from a lack of confidence, but from an excess of historical awareness. She knew that a moment of weakness would be photographed by the collective memory and used as evidence against all who would come after her. The fear of confirming stereotypes was more paralyzing than the fear of losing. The worst was when their own mind whispered the doubts they never verbalized. What if they're right? What if you really don't belong here? What if your whole life is a well-constructed imposture? Imposter syndrome was a luxury for those who had the right to be where they were. At 28, Zara was tired of being the first black woman in everything, the first black engineer in her division, the first black belt in that academy, the first to break standards she'd never asked to break. I just wanted to be Zara, not the official representative of American blackness. Since I was little, I had learned not to make mistakes. A stumble was more than a fall. It was a pretext for exclusion. Coach Bradley raised his right hand, fingers limp, wrist limp, swinging it back and forth like a dying plant in the wind. The movement was deliberately exaggerated, theatrical. His eyes sought approval from the audience of students already anticipating the joke. That's how you fight where you come from, right? The collective laughter was immediate, automatic, conditioned. That gesture carried centuries of mockery. It was the same movement slave owners used to imitate their properties at elegant dinners. The same one vaudeville comedians used to elicit laughter from white audiences. The same one that still echoed on television shows disguised as comedy. Coach Bradley didn't invent anything, he just recycled ancient hatred. Zara felt something ancient stir in her gut. It wasn't just anger, it was cellular memory. The same humiliations your great-grandmother swallowed in silence. The same invisible gag that suffocated generations of women before her. But she wasn't her ancestors. She had choices they never had. For 3 eternal seconds, 2 Zaras coexisted. One that wanted to disappear into the cold tatami floor, and another that wanted to explode in nuclear fury. One that whispered, "It's not worth it," and another that screamed, "Enough is enough." Time crystallized in that space between humiliation and response. The laughter around her wasn't new. It was the same sound that had accompanied her through school when she flubbed a word in English, still carrying her southern Georgia accent. The same sound when she tried out for the debate team and was told she was out of the norm. The same sound that had followed her to college, to work, to this very moment. How many times had she swallowed that sound? Her first reaction was the usual: lower her head, smile politely, prove through her competence that she deserved to be there. It was the survival protocol every black woman knew. Absorb aggression, demonstrate moral superiority, earn respect through infinite patience. But something different was pulsing in his temples. Coach Bradley's gesture wasn't just disrespectful, it was developer. It revealed that all the cordial smiles, all the warm welcomes, all the condescending compliments were all an act. Beneath the modern civility lurked the same old contempt. The mask had fallen, finally. For years, Zara had been part of a tacit agreement. She would act like one of the good ones, and they would pretend to accept her completely. She would be the palatable black woman, and they would be the progressive white people. Everyone won, everyone lied. But that gesture broke the contract. What welled up inside her wasn't just personal indignation. It was the collective rage of women who were never allowed to fight back, the silenced voices of slaves who were beaten in silence, the suppressed revolt of domestic servants who smiled at cruel mistresses, the trampled dignity of generations denied a response. Now she had. It was his gesture with his hand, imitating a wilted flower, that broke something deeper than muscles, the memory of daily debauchery. Zara walked to her bag with measured steps, each movement filled with intention. Her hands, once trembling, now held the firmness of someone who had found her center. She removed the black belt, not just a piece of fabric, but a symbol of 15 years of discipline, sweat, and quiet achievements. The mat bore witness to his transformation. As she wrapped the sash around her waist, Zara felt the presence of women who came before her. The hands of a great-grandmother who sewed in the dark after working on the plantation. The hands of a grandmother who cleaned other people's houses to pay for her children's schooling. The hands of a mother who typed legal documents, dreaming of her daughter becoming an engineer. Now his hands carried them all. Each turn of the ribbon was an invocation, not to the gods, but to the warrior women who survived so it could exist. Harriet Tubman leading slaves through the Underground Railroad. Ida B. Wells defying lynchings with her pen. Mae Jemison soaring among the stars. Serena Williams dominating courts where she wasn't welcome. The banner became an umbilical cord connecting her to historical resistance. The final knot was tightened tightly enough to transmit its intention to the universe. In that moment, humiliation transmuted into fuel, shame turned to dignity, fear alchemized into iron determination. She wasn't just preparing for a fight, she was dressing for war. "I carry you with me," she whispered into the air, but her ancestors heard. The spirit of every black woman who had to be twice as good, who swallowed disrespect in silence, who smiled when she wanted to scream. They all materialized in the black fabric that cinched her waist. The track pulsed with a life of its own. As a child, Zara was afraid of the dark. Her grandmother taught her, "We are children of the night. The darkness is not our enemy, it is our cradle." Now, faced with the white hostility that surrounded her, she understood the lesson. She didn't need to hide in the shadows. She needed to be in the shade. Powerful, inevitable, transformative. The black belt became a spiritual conduit. Through it flowed the courage of quilombolas who faced down the captains Dumato, forest captains, the cunning of mukamas who sabotaged the main house, the resilience of women who kept African traditions alive in hostile territory, the wisdom of matriarchs who raised children to be free in a slave land. 500 years of struggle running through his veins. Zara looked into the gym's side mirror and saw more than her reflection. She saw a lineage. She made a silent promise. It will not be in vain. Every tear you've shed, every humiliation you've swallowed, every dream you've sacrificed, it will all come together in this moment. The transformation was complete. When she turned to face Coach Bradley, Zara was no longer the polite engineer who had arrived an hour earlier. She was the epitome of generations of black female resistance. She was ancestry in motion. She was living history ready to rewrite the present. Before beginning the fight, she tightened her belt with the strength of someone who holds the voice of her ancestors in her body. Zara walked toward the center of the mat unhurriedly. She didn't run. She didn't gesture. She didn't raise her voice in dramatic declarations. Each step carried the serenity of someone who had found her inner truth and discovered that it was unshakable. The true revolution, he understood, began in silence. Her bare feet touched the exact center of the Japanese mat. There, where dozens of fighters had tested their skills, Zara planted herself like a centuries-old tree. She needed no words to communicate her intention. Her posture spoke for entire generations. Straight spine, relaxed shoulders, direct gaze. Coach Bradley expected an explosion, drama, the angry black woman stereotype that would justify his immediate dismissal. Instead, he found something that completely baffled him: unshakable calm. Zara had chosen the most powerful weapon in the arsenal of black resistance: unbreakable dignity. Rosa Parks didn't scream on the bus. She just sat there. The entire academy awaited the show. They expected tears, pleas, or perhaps a dramatic exit that would confirm their perceptions about people like her. Zara denied them that pleasure. She refused to play the role they imposed on her, neither victim nor aggressor. She simply existed in that space, without asking permission. Every second he remained in the center of the mat was a declaration, not of war, but of natural law. His feet on the imported Japanese soil said, "I belong here not because you allowed me to, but because my humanity is non-negotiable." Zara's veins ran with the blood of women who learned that survival sometimes required strategic silence, slaves who protected their children with discreet glances, Maids who held down jobs while swallowing humiliation. Activists who changed laws without ever raising their voices. Strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. As the seconds ticked by, something subtle happened in the gym. Zara's presence in the center of the mat began to shift the energy of the room. She was no longer asking to belong. She was declaring their belonging. The space was shaped around their certainty. Power had changed hands without a single word. His silence was not passivity. It was ancestral strategy. The same silence Sojourner Truth used before uttering, "Ain't I a woman?" The same silence Maya Angelou cultivated before finding her voice. The same silence Michelle Obama mastered before becoming First Lady. Black silence has always been a harbinger of revolution. Zara stood motionless in the center of the mat, her breathing controlled, her gaze serene. She wasn't just challenging Coach Bradley, she was rewriting the rules of that space. Her presence said, "I didn't come here to be tolerated. I came to belong." And belonging wasn't a favor. It was a right. He didn't shout. He didn't provoke. He just positioned himself in the center of the mat, as if to say, "I'm here, and that's enough." Coach Bradley strode toward the center of the mat with the predatory smile of someone who had already decided the outcome. 15 years of coaching the children of Atlanta's white elite assured him this would be another lesson in knowing your place. He flexed his shoulders, showing off muscles that still held memories of his glory days. "Let's see if you can handle real pressure," he declared loud enough for everyone to hear. Zara's first movement was almost imperceptible, a lateral shift of just 2 centimeters that completely shifted Bradley's center of gravity. He had expected frontal resistance, force against force. Instead, he found the void where he had projected his power. Physics did not negotiate with ego. The second movement flowed from the first like water finding its way. Zara used Bradley's own momentum against him, a basic martial arts principle he had taught for decades but never applied to himself. The trainer's body followed the trajectory his own lessons had determined. The irony had weight and speed. Bradley hit the mat with the dull thud of an ego shattering against reality. It wasn't brutal. It was necessary, like surgery performed by hands that knew every muscle, every pressure point, every law of biomechanics. 15 years of training condensed into 2 movements that redefined hierarchies. Knowledge had no color, but application did. For 3 eternal seconds, the Elite Combat Academy experienced an educational silence. It was the sound of collective surprise digesting a new reality, the sound of racial assumptions being recalibrated in real time, the sound of a world where black people no longer needed to prove their worth. They had just witnessed the future. The first applause came from an unexpected source. Marcus, the black janitor, who was watching from the entrance. His applause broke the spell of surprise, freeing others to acknowledge what they had witnessed. Not charity, not luck, pure competence, applied with surgical precision. The truth always found its own witnesses. Zara didn't strike a victory pose. She didn't provoke. She didn't humiliate. She reached out to help Bradley to his feet, a gesture that held more transformative power than 1,000 speeches on racial equality. She had made her point without uttering a word about race, class, or belonging. The action will speak all the necessary languages. Coach Bradley accepted the outstretched hand, his eyes registering something that transcended physical defeat. For the first time in decades, he looked at a black person without preconceived filters. He saw Zara as she had always been, an exceptional fighter who belonged on that mat on her own merit. Humanization happened in both directions. Around the mat, white faces processed an education in real time. Madison felt her perceptions reorganizing. Kevin silently questioned his own assumptions. Mrs. Harrison, watching from the stands, experienced the discomfort of privilege being wordlessly questioned. True change began with embarrassment, 2 precise movements, the coach on the ground, and for seconds, the silence weighed more than any trophy, until the first applause broke the custom. She didn't smile. She didn't strike a victory pose. She didn't provoke. She didn't humiliate. Instead, Zara did something that transcended any celebration. She greeted Coach Bradley with her head held high, a simple gesture that carried the weight of 500 years of black dignity finally being recognized without compromise. With that nod, the entire Elite Combat Academy understood what respect means without asking permission. It wasn't arrogance, it was unshakable self-esteem. It wasn't defiance, it was a natural affirmation of full humanity. It wasn't anger, It was the serenity of someone who knows their own worth and doesn't need the validation of others to confirm it. The gesture represented generations of black women who could never raise their heads in hostile spaces, slaves who lowered their eyes to survive, maids who smiled at cruel employers, workers who silently accepted lower wages, students who diminished themselves so as not to disturb white colleagues. All of them were in that movement, finally free to exist fully. Mrs. Harrison felt something shift in her chest, perhaps the first real stirring of her racial consciousness in 60 years. For the first time, she understood that diversity wasn't a favor whites granted black people, but a wealth black people brought to spaces that benefited from their presence. The paradigm had completely reversed. Madison and Kevin exchanged glances filled with new understanding. They had grown up in such hermetic bubbles of privilege that they never questioned whether they deserved to be where they were. Now, confronted with undeniable black competence, they were experiencing for the first time the humility of recognizing that talent was not a demographic monopoly. Coach Bradley extended his hand in greeting, but his eyes held something deeper than courtesy, genuine recognition. For the first time in decades, he was looking at a black person without preconceived filters, without diminished expectations, without the patronizing arrogance that had defined their previous interactions. And they also understood that one should never judge a person by their skin color. The lesson didn't come through sermons on tolerance or workshops on diversity. It came through the pure, crystal-clear, indisputable demonstration that racial prejudice was nothing more than willful ignorance confronted by the reality of human excellence. In that respectful greeting, with her head held high and dignity intact, Zara had rewritten the rules of a space that for decades served as a microcosm of segregated America. Not through confrontation, but through the silent affirmation that competence knows no color, and that true respect arises from recognizing the other's full humanity. In the corner of the room, a black girl watched silently. In her eyes, the certainty that the mat now represented her, too. Keisha was 12 years old and had arrived with her mother, a nurse at Grady Hospital, who had finally mustered the courage to enroll her in Elite Combat Academy after hearing hopeful whispers on social media from Atlanta's black community. His eyes absorbed every movement of that transformative moment. For the first time in his life, he saw a woman carrying her own melanin occupying a space that had always seemed impossible, not as a tolerated visitor, but as the rightful owner of its excellence. The Japanese tatami mat, the infinite mirrors, the imported equipment, all of this had ceased to be the exclusive territory of white America and became a stage where competence determined belonging. The girl instinctively touched the medallion around her neck, a legacy from her grandmother who had whispered survival secrets to her. Our ancestors planted dreams in hard soil so that girls like you could reap opportunities they never had. In that instant, Keisha understood that she was not just witness to an individual victory. She was the heir to a generational revolution. For years, she had grown up hearing that she needed to be 3 times better to get equal recognition. Now, watching Zara be respected for the sheer force of her competence, she glimpsed different horizons. Perhaps her generation didn't need to carry the burden of constantly proving their right to exist in spaces of excellence. Perhaps it was enough to simply be exceptional and expect the recognition that excellence naturally deserves. Marcus, the cleaning worker who had given the first round of applause, approached the girl, tears shining. "You witnessed history in the making," he murmured, his voice choked with decades of emotion. "One of us showed we were always capable. We just needed the opportunity to prove it." Keisha nodded, sensing she had witnessed more than a physical struggle. She had witnessed her own future being rewritten. In the following weeks, Elite Combat Academy would receive an avalanche of applications from neighborhoods it had never before known. East Atlanta, Southwest, Bankhead, Black, Latino, and Asian children, all carrying the newfound certainty that this space belonged to them by birthright, not by benevolent grant. Zara had broken an invisible barrier, but its reverberations would be visible in the complete transformation of that environment. The girl in the corner of the room would grow up knowing that competence was enough, that she wouldn't need to be a representative of the race, or carry the burden of proving that people like her deserved to be there. She could simply train, grow, succeed, and occupy spaces with the ease of someone who always knew she belonged. If this story touched you, please like and share, so more people can see the strength of black representation. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss stories of protagonism that transform realities. What about you? Have you ever occupied a space where your presence challenged stereotypes? Tell us in the comments. Your story might inspire someone. Remember, your excellence does not need permission to exist.